Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Envera at the board. Today we're going to do something a little different because we just started the new year, and that is we're going to talk about almost all of the air compliance reports that will be due during the first quarter of 2016. So here they are here. There's a lot of them, so we'll go through this. And what we're trying to do here is we're just trying to give you an idea of what's due during the first quarter so you have a better idea about what your workflow will look like during the first quarter so that you can get these reports done. In our experience, there's a lot that's going on or that goes on within a facility during the first quarter to sometimes 3 quarters of the year. And so in our experience, we have seen that the better you know about what your workflow looks like ahead of time, the more prepared you are in getting everything that you need to do done by the time that they are due. So let's get started. So the first report that we want to talk about is the Title V Semi-Annual Monitoring Report. The Semi-Annual Monitoring Report is required by all Title V facilities, and it's due on February 28th, and it's due to the EPA as well as the AQMD. And the report simply summarizes all of the monitoring activities that went on during the reporting period, which will be from July to December 2015, and then within that time frame to report any deviations that occurred during the reporting period. And so again, it's a summary of all monitoring. You submit it to the EPA and the AQMD, and it's due February 28th. Now, one thing about these dates is that all the dates that we've presented here are, quote, canonical dates. That means the deadlines will differ for some of these reports, but these are the dates that we like to go by. And as a good rule of thumb, it's always good to have your report submitted 7 to 10 days before the deadline or these canonical deadlines here. That way you can be sure that they get it, that you get it submitted on time. Now, the best way to know when things are due is to actually visit the website for the AQMD and look them up yourself. But generally, a lot of these reports are routine. Some of these reports that we'll get to at the end are one-off type reports, but in all, you want to be sure that you check the regulatory agency's website for the exact due date of these reports. But like I said, as a rule of thumb, it's best to get these reports submitted between 7 and 10 days before the dates that we have listed here. So like I said, the first report is the SAM report. The second report is the Title V Annual Compliance Certification. And this ACC, or the ACC that we have listed here due February 28th, are for Title V facilities that are not in the reclaim program, or if they are in the reclaim program, they're in the reclaim program and they're classified as a Cycle 1 facility, meaning these Cycle 1 facilities have a reclaim compliance year that spans from January to December. And so for the non-reclaim and Cycle 1 reclaim facilities, your compliance certification is due February 28th. It's submitted to the EPA and the AQMD. And the compliance certification is simply the annual certification that's submitted by Title V facilities to the regulatory agency, certifying under perjury of law that the facility is in compliance with all the rules and regulations applicable to the facility, and then if not, provide a little bit of history or a little bit of information as to why the facility is not in compliance. And so again, for non-reclaim and reclaim Cycle 1 facilities, this Title V ACC is due February 28th. Now you may ask, what happens if you're Title V but you're in the reclaim Cycle 2 program? And in that case, your compliance year goes from July to June. And in that case, your ACC is actually due in August. And so you wouldn't submit it here in February. If you're Title V Reclaim Cycle 2 facility, you would submit that report in August, not February. Moving on from the Title V program, let's talk about the Reclaim program. And so the next report here that we want to talk about is the Reclaim Cycle 1 APEP. Now remember, Cycle 1 reclaim facilities are these reclaim facilities that have a compliance year that is based on the calendar year. So that's January to December. And so for these Reclaim Cycle 1 facilities, then you have the annual certification of emissions to the reclaim program that's submitted to the AQMD by February 28. Now, one part here, one thing to note with this APEP is that this APEP is the final certification of all the emissions being reported to the reclaim program for that compliance year. Therefore, you not only want to ensure that your emissions that you're reporting are correct, but in addition to that, you also have enough reclaim trading credits in your account to cover those emissions. And in addition to that, we like to recommend a 10 to 15% buffer just in case anything happens during the auditing process. And so again, the Reclaim Cycle 1 APEP is due February 28. For the folks that are in the Reclaim Cycle 2 program, you'll have a quarterly certification of emissions that will be due to the AQMD on January 30th. Now, again, similar to the annual emissions for the Reclaim Cycle 1 facilities, if you're submitting a Cycle 2 QCER by the 30th, you also want to ensure that your emissions are correct and that you're holding enough reclaim trading credits to cover the emissions being reported for the October to December 2015 reporting period. And so that moves us away from the reclaim program. Let's talk about some of these other reports here. Now, moving away from sort of these larger programs and moving sort of into some of these reports that are required by specific rules, we find that, you know, the Rule 1173 report is due because this is the end of the calendar year. That report is due 60 days after the end of the calendar year. That puts us at about February 28th. The Rule 1173 report is submitted to the AQMD, and that report simply summarizes all of the leaks that have been found at your facility if you're subject to Rule 1173, as well as, you know, when have they been fixed, what kind of leaks, the size of leaks, the kind of equipment. Is it a light liquid leak, heavy liquid? Is it a gas leak? Is it on a valve? Is it on a pump? A lot of these reports are prepared by your LDAR contractor, and so all you would need to do is submit, get the report from your LDAR contractor and submit that to the AQMD. So again, the annual report for the LDAR program, you submit that to the AQMD. It's due 60 days after the end of the year. That puts it about February 28th. In addition to 1173, we'll also have the Rule 461 annual report. And in the 461 annual report, you'll need to summarize the monthly throughputs for the previous calendar year if you're subject to 461. Usually people are subject to 461 because they have a gasoline dispensing equipment on site. And so that report is, again, an annual summary of monthly throughput. You submit that to the AQMD, and then that is due March 1st. Now, in addition here, we have the Rule 1110.2 quarterly report. So Rule 1110.2 applies to large stationary engines greater than 50 brake horsepower. So a lot of these engines are either, could be cogen engines, could be generators, could be blowers, could be water pumps, could be, engines serve in a variety of different purposes at industrial facilities. If you have an engine that's greater than 50 brake horsepower and is subject to Rule 1110.2, then you'll have a Rule 1110.2 quarterly report that will be due February 15th. It will be due to the AQMD, and this quarterly report simply summarizes all of the deviations associated with operating that engine during the October through December reporting period. And so again, that's Rule 1110.2. Another big one here within the AQMD is the annual emission report. The way we like to look at the annual emission report is that the AER is simply a report. It's like taxes. Under the AER program, you need to quantify the types as well as the amounts of air pollutants released by your facility during the past calendar year. Based on the emissions that you calculate, you'll have to pay fees. So, and the amount that you pay depends on the amount that you emit. So if you emit a high amount of pollutants, you're going to have a high amount of fees due. This report needs to be submitted to the AQMD, and then this report is due about March 1st. Again, you want to check the website for the exact deadline. We place it at about March 1st because it's about 60 days from the end of the year or from the start of the year. But since the AQMD is closed on the weekends and they're closed on Monday, this 60-day mark could fall on one of those days. And if it does, the AQMD does move it to another date of when the district is open. But you always want to check the website every year to know when the exact deadline of these AERs are due. Another reason why you'd want to check the AQMD's website for the AER is because you want to be able to know if there are any updates to the program that the agency will be rolling out. Last year, the district actually updated their reporting tool, and so the deadline was actually moved. It was moved a number of months from March to incorporate all the changes and to allow facilities to get up to speed with the new reporting tool. I know that this year they have made more changes to the reporting tool. It's recommended that you go back to the AQMD's website to know what are these changes, and then if the deadline has changed. I don't expect the deadline to change. I think the deadline will be the same, it will be due about 60 days, but the exact deadline is something that you should look up on the AQMD's website. In addition to the AERs, moving along to the CARB Refrigerant Management Program submission, the CARB has been regulating refrigerants at industrial facilities, equipment with refrigerants from all sizes, greater than 50 to 200, greater than 200 pounds of charge. But this year, small facilities, and what we mean by small facilities is that facilities with equipment with refrigerants in them that are greater than 50 but less than 200 pounds of charge. For these facilities, you're subject to the RMP program here, which will require you to do inspections of your equipment. You will be also required to file reports and then keep records of maintenance activities related to the equipment having this refrigerant in them. And so that's part of this RMP program. If you're a small facility with pieces of equipment that have refrigerants in them greater than 50 but less than 200 pounds of charge, you have to register by March 1st, and you have to register using the CARB's R3 tool. And so that needs to be done by the 1st. And then moving along here, two more reports. We have the EPA GHG report. This is an annual report that's submitted by larger facilities, refineries, power plants, industrial facilities, or any facility that combusts fuel that results in greenhouse gas emissions greater than 25,000 metric tons carbon dioxide equivalent. If you fall into that category, you'll be subject to the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reporting Rule. And so that requires to file an annual report of GHG emissions. This report is submitted to the EPA using the EPA's E-GGRT tool, which stands for the Electronic Greenhouse Gas Reporting Tool. And the E-GGRT tool is simply an app within EPA's CDX or Central Data Exchange suite of apps that are used by reporters, all different types of reporters, to transmit data and submit reports to the EPA. And so a lot of times facilities who are submitting these reports will be subject to the TRI reporting requirements. The TRI is submitted through an app called TryMeWeb, which is also an app within the EPA CDX database. Don't want to talk about that at all because it's not due in the first quarter, but just know that the CDX tool is the same tool that you would use to report your TRI. as well as the EGGRT. You will need to get access to the EGGRT app within the CDX account. Is something that you may want to look up on the website if you're new to your facility. Getting back to the report at hand here, again, if you have a facility that has greenhouse gas emissions in excess of 25,000 metric tons per year, you want to submit your annual report of GHG emissions. That's submitted to the EPA March 31st. That report has moved up a little bit. It used to be due in April. Now it's due at the ending of March. Now, if you are submitting the EPA Greenhouse Gas Report, you will also be submitting a California Greenhouse Gas Report under Assembly Bill or AB32. Now, the AB32 program is a much more complicated program than the federal EPA GHG program, but they're similar in the sense that you have to submit annual reports if you are one of these large facilities like a refinery or a power plant, or you have a facility that combusts fuel, and that combustion of that fuel produces carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions in excess of 25,000 metric tons per year. You will need to submit under both programs. And so getting back to the CARB report, if you're filing the EPA report, you will also need to file the CARB report. Again, it's an annual report of GHG emissions. The report, while being largely similar, interestingly, it is largely very different from one another. And so, people think, if you submit the EPA report, the CARB report will be exactly the same. That's not necessarily true and it depends on what reporting category you are in. So if you have like an oil and gas facility, some of the ways that the CARB wants the emissions done differs from the way that the federal EPA wants those emissions calculated. So there are subtleties, but like I said, while they're very similar, they're very different. It's best to just treat these as two separate reports. But nonetheless, that report is due April 10th. Now, this is April 10th deadline. It's outside of the quarter one, but since these reports are very similar and they're due 10 days apart, we're just going to classify it as a quarter one report. So that's submitted to the California Air Resources Board using their reporting tool called Cal-EGGRT, and that stands for California Electronic Greenhouse Gas Reporting Tool. Now, one thing that a lot of people get confused on is that, they have access to the federal EGGRT, and then now, you will need access to the California EGGRT. They're two different reporting tools because they're two different programs. Now, even though they may look the same, it's important to remember that there are two different reporting tools, and so you will need to get access to both the federal EGGRT plus the California EGGRT to submit these reports. Now, one last comment here is that if you are submitting a California AB32 report by the April 10th deadline, you will also need to have your emissions verified by a third party, and that verification needs to happen by September 1st. And the reason why that September 1st deadline is there is because the emissions, when verified, serve as an entity's compliance obligation for the cap and trade program. And I'm not going to talk about the cap and trade program here, but for facilities that are in reporting by the April 10th deadline and having their emissions verified, those same facilities are also going to be subject to the cap and trade program. And there's a whole suite of things that need to be done if you're subject to the cap and trade program. And so that verification is very important. And this verification actually also serves as the bridge between the mandatory reporting program where reports are due in April, and then the cap and trade program where an entity has to surrender credits to the California Air Resources Board. The verification is the bridge between the two. And so with that, we'd like to just close by just running down this list one more time. Again, you have the Title V SAM. That's due February 28th to the EPA and the AQMD, summarizing all Title V monitoring activities. Moving down, if you're a non-reclaim or a Title V reclaim Cycle 1 facility, you will also have an annual compliance certification that will be due to the EPA and the AQMD on February 28th. If you are a reclaim Cycle 1 facility, You will have your annual certification of emissions due to the AQMD. That will be due February 28th. If you are a reclaimed Cycle 2 facility, you will have your quarterly report due to the AQMD on January 30th. If you have an 1173 LDAR program, then you will have your annual report due February 28th to the AQMD. If you're subject to Rule 461 because you have if you have gasoline dispensing equipment on site, that report, your annual report of throughput, monthly throughput, will be due to the AQMD on March 1st. If you have an engine greater than 50 brake horsepower subject to Rule 1110.2, your quarterly report will be due January 15th. If you're subject to the AQMD's annual emission report, you will have an annual emission report due on March 1st. Again, you want to check the AQMD's website to know of the exact deadline. If you have equipment containing refrigerants greater than 50 but less than 200 pounds, you will need to register for the CARB's R&P program. You must register by March 1st using the CARB's R3 tool. And then lastly, if you have a facility that has GHG emissions in excess of 25,000 metric tons per year, then you will need to submit a GHG report to the EPA by March 31st using the federal E-GGRT tool. And then in addition to that, you will need to submit a greenhouse gas report to the California Air Resources Board using the California E-GGRT tool by April 10th. And then if you're reporting to the California Air Resources Board by this April 10th deadline, then you will need to have a verification completed of your emissions by September 1st. Again, the dates here, we call them canonical dates because these are the dates that we like to operate internally by, but we always advise our clients to get these reports submitted 7 to 10 days ahead or before these dates here to allow enough time so you're not scrambling at the end. But again, you want to use your judgment when deciding when to actually submit these reports. Like I said, for the AER, check out the AQMD's website. We'll have a link in the notes below to the AQMD's page where you can check out if there are any updates to the program, the reporting tool, and then you'll also be able to check out the exact date of when these reports are due. There you have it. Quick rundown. All the reports due 2016. We hope that this can help you better plan your quarter to get all these reports done in addition to everything else that you got to get done. We know it's a busy time. We're here to help. Let us know if you have any questions. We'll see you in the next video. Take care.